Welcome back to the Unwind With Me podcast. I am reading a Rip Van Winkle of the Kalahari by Frederick Carruthers. This is chapter 7, The Country of Craters, The Path of Skulls, and the Snake. Filled as I could but be with thankfulness at my escape from captivity and from an awful death, I did not realize for a time what the loss of the diamonds meant to me. Indeed, I was too exhausted by my terrific struggle to do more than crawl a few yards away from the brink, throw myself down in the sand, and sink into the sleep of utter weariness. But with my awakening, the bitter truth was borne upon me in a flash. All my struggle had then been in vain. I had won my freedom, but had lost all that would make life bearable. Even if I could win back through the desert, what had I now to compensate me for the horrible disfigurement that would make me shunned and despised, a leper amongst my fellow men? Bitterly did I regret my pleasant prison down below. Surely it would have been better to stay there in peace till I died, as fate had apparently decreed. And if I could have done so, I would certainly have returned. But to return was impossible, and I must make up my mind to struggle through the desert or die where I was. Moreover, in the midst of my bitter reflections, there came the comforting recollection that I had still the blue diamonds that I had kept apart and put in my pocket. Eagerly I felt for them. Yes, they were safe, and in themselves they must be worth a fortune. My spirits rose with a bound again. Why should I dream of giving in? I was strong and hard, and if I could win through, the diamonds would surely enable me to fit out an expedition and return. And with ropes, the descent into the crater would be easy. Rested by the cool of the night, I felt little the worse for my climb, and was all eagerness for dawn to break, that I might see what manner of country I was in, for I had been half demented when my terrible ride from the pursuing sandstorm had brought me into it. At last daylight came, and I saw that although in the midst of a wide sandy plain there were no dunes, scattered bushes grew here and there, and dotted about in the distance were a number of bare granite rocks. The crater I had climbed from went sheer down at my feet so abruptly indeed, and with so little to denote its presence, that within a few yards of its brink nothing whatever could be seen of it. I looked once more into its depths to where the pool lay dark in the still, dim light of dawn, and from it my eyes followed the course that I had taken in my climb, and I marveled that I had ever reached the top. And a great thankfulness rose in my heart and drowned the unworthy regret that I had felt at the loss of the diamonds. And with a last long look at my late prison, I turned and made my way towards a prominent pile of rocks in the distance, from which I hoped to be able to see more of my surroundings. My water bottle was nearly empty already, and the old haunting dread of thirst was beginning to fill my mind. But soon this fear left me, for within a mile I found Tisama flourishing, and at the first pile of rocks a little spring of water. Cheered and encouraged, I made good progress in spite of the now blazing sun, and soon I reached the pile of rocks. And to my astonishment, I found that they formed part of the margin of a crater, almost identical with the one from which I had escaped, deep and inaccessible, and with a mass of vegetation filling the bottom. This discovery made food for thought. It had never entered my head that the queer place of my imprisonment had been one of many, and I had thought that once I could reach even a friendly native tribe where some kind of rope was obtainable, I could locate the crater again and secure the bag of diamonds. but I had already stumbled upon another crater, and maybe there were many. And this indeed I found to be the case, for they became more numerous as I proceeded, until the whole country was pitted with them. They were of all sizes and depths, some mere pits of 50 feet in diameter or less, some huge gulfs a mile or more across, and so deep that it was difficult to distinguish what was at the bottom. Invariably, their walls were sheer, and I could explore none of them, but in nearly all I saw the gleam of water. So numerous were they as I penetrated farther into this strange country that I was forced to make wide detours in my endeavor to avoid them. And so bewildering did this labyrinth of huge pits at last become that I became hopelessly lost among them, and at times thought that I should never break clear of them again. Day after day I wandered about this vast and apparently level plain, finding every short distance a huge yawning gulf at my feet. Forced to try new routes, I constantly being pulled up by similar obstacles. And all this time I saw no sign of life, not even a spore in the sand to show that mankind had ever trod there. There was no animal life even. A few birds and a few snakes, nothing more indeed. So deserted and dead was this weird land that it appeared unreal, and often I imagined that by some strange chance I had been transported to some other and long dead planet. So little was this maze of craters like Mother Earth. I had food and water enough, and as the moon now gave plenty of light, I walked only at night, resting in the shadow of the rocks by day. One night I had made better progress than usual, having walked for some hours without having to deviate from my path, and was beginning to hope that I had escaped from the labyrinth, when suddenly, at my very feet, there yawned the usual abyss, but this time so huge that I could scarce make out the farther cliffs, though the moon was full and it was almost as light as day. It would mean a long and weary detour, and my heart sank as I thought of it, then leapt as it had not leapt since the day I found the diamond by the pool in the crater. For there in the misty depths, far away towards the farther cliffs, twinkled a fire. A fire! Yes, and I had seen no fire except my own kindling since the night that Inyati had died. Months surely it must have been. Years ago? Here at last must be human beings. Savages maybe, but still flesh and blood like myself, and if they were in the crater, there must be a way down. That night I walked as I had never walked before, following the brink of the chasm and scarcely taking my eyes from the tiny flame that meant so much to me. A way out, a way back to civilization, a life among beings like myself. All this it would mean to me, even if I found but savages by the fire, for they could put me in the right path, and it never occurred to me to fear them. Now, as the broad moon rose higher, I could see into the crater's depths, and this, besides being more vast, was not as the others I had seen. Its floor appeared to be quite level, and looked to be of pure white sand, but everywhere it sparkled in the bright moonlight. Diamonds, surely. I was near the fire now, though far above it, and now I could see there was a path, a broad white path down a steep slope. It must be broad to show so plainly, for I was still a mile or more away. In my eagerness, I forgot my fatigue and hastened panting towards this first blessed sign of man's handiwork that I had seen for so long. Here it was at last, a broad white road, running straight as an arrow away across the sands in one direction and leading down into the pit on the other, a road paved apparently with round white stones, all of one size. Something in their appearance struck me. A loose one lay beside the path, and I stooped to examine it. It was a skull, a human skull. The whole road was paved with them as far as the eye could reach. There were thousands upon thousands, myriads of them. And as I realized what they were, fear seized me, and I turned away from this terrible pathway. At last I threw myself down in the black shadow of some rocks, still trembling and agitated, and tried to compose myself to think. What manner of men were these I had found at last, and who watched there below by the fire? What race was this that thus made grim mockery of their dead? At length I overcame my fears sufficiently to return not to the path but to the edge of the crater at some distance from it, and peering down could see that the fire was still burning, and here, hiding as best as I could, I waited till morning. Daylight showed me no sign of life, however, though still the pale flame flickered, and I could now make out that it burnt before a sort of building which seemed to be of white polished stone. Till well after broad daylight I lay and watched, but nothing stirred, and I determined that I would go down and see what manner of fire was this that burnt day and night without tending. The skulls did not look as ghastly in sunlight as they had done in the pale light of the moon. I could see too that this path was ancient, and nowhere could I find traces of its being used. As I had seen the night before, it led straight across the desert, and in the distance in that direction I could now see faint blue mountains. So there was an end to this land of desolation after all, and I determined that after I had seen what was below, I would follow that road. The slope went down steeply, and here the path was roughly stepped. As it led deeper too, the slope narrowed until at the bottom the entrance to the crater lay through a natural gateway of rock that rose high on either hand and almost shut out the light. Through it the strange path led, and here in the gloom the horror of this awful place again came upon me, and I could scarce bring myself to enter the narrow defile. I remember clutching my revolver as I went forward at last. Remember thinking too that it could avail me nothing, for here was no live being to fear. Here was naught but the dead. The utter silence and loneliness, even after my months of silence and loneliness, seemed to weigh upon me like a heavy burden. And when a bat came fluttering by me in the gloom, I uttered a hoarse cry of alarm. But the distance was but short, and soon I stood safe in the daylight again, and on the floor of the crater. And now I could see that the white floor I had thought was sand was also strewn with bones, of animals principally, though men's skeletons also lay thick on every side. Bones of the elephant principally, for among them lay huge tusks in quantities, tusks the like of which I had never seen, except in pictures of the giant mammoth of prehistoric ages. Tusks the girth of a man in size. Piled in all directions they lay. The whole vast floor was indeed a stupendous charnel house. And among the white sand and bones, diamonds lay thick as pebbles on a beach. Across this floor ran the path, now a raised causeway some feet above the level of the sand, and about 500 yards from where I stood, the fire burnt in front of a building in the shape of a pyramid. Still no sign of life could I see, and I made my way towards it. As I did so, the sun's rays broke over the edge of the cliff above and fell full upon the top of the pyramid, and another flame seemed to shoot from it and remained there flashing brilliantly. I was so close to the fire now, and saw that it was no hand-fed flame, but a column that rose from an orifice in the rock, and burnt fiercely with a low roaring noise and a strong mephitic odor. Probably it was some kind of natural gas. At any rate, there was no one near it and nothing to fear from it. The pyramid behind it was made of ivory, thousands of tons of magnificent tusks going to make up its 40 feet of height, and up it in steps ran the path, for the pyramid was the culmination of this road of dead. I climbed up and reached the apex, a platform some 20 feet square, above which something still towered, crowned by a flashing light. Its brilliance dazzled me, and it was only by shading my eyes with my palm that I could discern what the object was that bore it. Then, directly beneath the glare, I gradually made out a gigantic face glaring down upon me, a face carved with such wondrous art that, monstrous as it was, it appeared to live and to be endowed with such awful malevolence that for a moment I shrank back in dismay. It was the face of a woman, but the body that it crowned was that of a snake and was coiled around an ivory pillar rising from the platform. Marvelously fashioned of bronze, the face with bared serpent fangs bent down as though to strike, and set in a strangely fashioned diadem above the brows was a gigantic diamond as large as a man's head and of such blinding luster that it was impossible to look closely at it, as well try to gaze full at the midday sun. It was an idol, undoubtedly, a Moloch waiting for a sacrifice. And as my fascinated eyes at length left the face of terror and passed down the coiled body and ivory pillar, I saw that the sacrifice was already there. For at the base lay a dead man, and his blood was scarcely upon the altar. He was fast bound with hide thongs to stanchions cut in the rock, a man almost as white as myself, with long straight black hair and clothed in clean white flowing robes. His face was horribly disfigured, seared and burnt as though by red-hot irons, and his features quite indistinguishable. Apparently, then, he had been tortured, before being stabbed to the heart by the strangely fashioned knife of bronze that lay beside him. It is beyond me to describe the terror with which the sight of this dead and mutilated victim inspired me. I had seen no human being for so long. Dead Inyati's face had been the last that I had gazed upon. Then after long I had seen the skeleton in the pool, the road of skulls, and now at last I gazed upon a human form again. It was again that of the dead. All around me was death everywhere, and I felt that unless I escaped and found human companionship, soon my mind would give way beneath these horrors, and I must quit this place of sacrifice at once, for the fiends who had laid this victim there would probably give me but scant mercy were I found there. I examined the body again. It might well have been that of a South European, so light was the skin, and now I noted that on one wrist was a copper bracelet exactly similar to the one Inyati had given me, and which I now wore on my own wrist. I compared them and found them identical, and now I noted that the rude attempt at a snake's head into which their fastenings were fashioned was undoubtedly an imitation of the head of the idol above me. This, then, doubtless, was Inyati's land, and this one of the priests he had spoken of. Mayhap he had killed one of them and taken his bracelet before he fled, for he had spoken of jealousy and of a woman. But of the idol, the road, the craters, he had said nothing. Maybe he knew not himself. True, he had feared the priests till the little gun had become his. With it he would doubtless have faced all the priests living. But I, looking at the dead man and realizing something of the manner of his death, was in deadly fear. My revolver would be but little use against fiends who served their own priests thus. I must fly from this place at once, if indeed it were not already too late. But gaze as I could, no sign of life showed anywhere. No sound broke the silence except the low hissing murmur of the flame that burnt everlasting incense to the shrine of horror before me. And so, glancing from side to side in mortal terror, staring at the sound of my own soft footsteps, and feeling that unseen eyes watched me from all sides, I left the snake and its victim, the pyramid and the flame, and fled swiftly along the causeway, not even stooping to pick up the diamonds that lay on all sides, intent only upon escape. I reached the entrance and passed through the narrow portals and breasted the steep slope, and fearful and overwrought, I gained the open plain again. Northward lay the path to the mountains, south the labyrinth of craters I had left. Westward mayhap I should find the dunes, and pitiless as they were, I chose that path rather than follow the road of skulls towards the country and the mercy of such fiends as these people must be. Soon I had left the crate far behind, and no trace of the road could be seen when I glanced back, but I could not shake off the haunting fear that now possessed me, that I was being watched. Eyes seemed to follow me everywhere. Each bush or rock seemed to hide a watcher, and again I turned aside and searched and looked fearfully over my shoulder, but nothing could I see. And so I walked till evening, seeing no trace of the human beings I knew must be near, and at last, somewhat easier in mind, I threw myself down to sleep, and awakened to find myself seized and held as in a vice, to feel thongs passed about me, and a hand passing over my forehead, gently, and then all consciousness faded away. Chapter 8. The Cataclysm, the Priestess, Look and Forget. Now gazing down full upon me as though in exultation was again the awful face of the snake, with its diadem, the great bright diamond. Its glare hurt me, and I tried to move my head, but in vain. I was tied fast, and now I realized that this was no part of an awful dream, but that I lay a hopeless victim in the place of the tortured man I had seen but a day before. And I knew that I was no longer alone, for though I could see nothing but the grim idol, I could hear around me the murmur of many tongues. Low but vast in volume, it seemed as though thousands were there below me, hushed and waiting for the consummation of the sacrifice. At times the murmur rose to a mutter as of distant thunder, then again it would be hushed almost into dead silence. I could not speak or move. I could only lie inert and helpless, filled with the agony of despair, with closed eyes awaiting the stroke, and praying silently that it would come before the mutilation I had seen on the other face. Now came a single hoarse voice near me, intoning words in a chant, and then in response broke out the deep roar of a multitude of voices. Higher and higher it rose until the air vibrated with its thunder. Then again it would die away, fainter and fainter, till it was nothing but as the sighing of wind through dead men's bones. Again and again, chant and response broke forth, and now too I could distinguish much of its meaning, for the tongue was that of Inyati. A song of supplication it seemed to me, a song for the snake's wrath to be appeased, to accept the sacrifice offered it, and to send rain upon their dried up fields. Now it died utterly away, and sweat broke from me in agony as I waited for I knew not what. I tried to make up my mind to die calmly, to resign myself to the inevitable, but my period of liberty and my newfound strength had brought back the old love of life that had burned strong in me before my captivity, and my whole being cried out passionately against this awful end. Still there was silence for a seeming eternity of waiting for the sharp sting of death, and then another voice lifted as though in invocation. Solemn, loud, clear, and sonorous, the measured accents rang forth from close beside me, a voice of unearthly beauty chanting a rhythmic sentence or two, repeated again and again. No hoarse voice of a man this, but of a woman, a priestess, calling down the fires of Baal to consume the sacrifice. And, as if in response, came now the peal of heavy thunder. I had been in terror of the knife before, but had lain silent and with closed eyes, awaiting the end. But as the terrible significance of the song of invocation reached me, a hoarse cry of horror broke from my parched throat, and I again tried in vain to struggle free. For now my staring eyes confirmed the terrible thought that had come to me. The sun would soon be exactly overhead, and when it was, its rays would strike exactly through the huge diamond that crowned the snake, and the intolerable rays, thus concentrated as though by a mighty burning glass, would fall full upon my eyes, torturing and searing me to the semblance of what I had seen on the dead priest. Screaming and writhing in an agony of apprehension, I lay helpless whilst the sun sped on, until its rim had almost reached the diamond. But now came peal after peal of terrific thunder and vivid lightning that made even the sun look pale, and speeding across my field of vision came also a huge black cloud, thick and ominous, but to me a most blessed sight, a messenger of mercy, a miracle. Swiftly it sped, but would it be in time? The sun had reached the diamond now, and shrink as I would, I already felt the roasting heat that beat upon the stone but a few inches from my head. Surely it would reach me. My brain would crack. But now, thank God, the cloud had swept across, and for the moment I was safe, at least from this terror. And now, with the almost incessant roar of thunder, came the rain, a few huge stinging drops at first, then a downpour such as I had never seen. In incessant sheets it fell like a huge cataract, beating upon my helpless face till I gasped for breath, as one half drowned. And soon the roar of water falling upon water almost drowned the pealing thunder. The shouts of joy that hailed the first few drops were soon changed to wild cries of alarm, and as still the deluge continued, as though the very floodgates of heaven were opened, the screams of the vast multitude joined the roar of water and the pealing of thunder in one stupendous chorus. I could not see, but I could hear and realize that an awful struggle was going on below me. There, in that vast hollow, the unseen people would be trapped beyond hope, for into it the water from the plains above would rush in one vast cataract. And still the torrents beat down and the thunder pealed, and I, half mad with my sufferings, yelled and shouted in mockery of the screams of those who would have immolated me and who were now themselves perishing all around me. At length, the groans and screams of the dying multitude died down to choking gasps. Then even these ceased, but still the thunder pealed, and the rain beat down upon my unprotected body, till my overwrought senses rebelled, and I sank into a swoon. A voice, the voice that I had heard in invocation, came to me in my disordered dreams, calling me back. Its insistence troubled me, for I was unwilling to return. But again and again it called, and I at length came back reluctantly to reality. "Fear not, thy life is thine own again," said the grave, vibrant accents in my ear, and I opened my eyes to find myself still lying upon the altar. Gazing down upon me was a face that I shall never forget to my dying day, the face of a woman whose skin of ivory whiteness accentuated the unfathomable blackness of the most wonderful eyes I shall ever behold. They seemed to pierce me through and through and to search my very soul, as I lay there and gazed back into them as a fascinated bird gazes back into the eyes of a striking snake. Power infinite there was in those commanding orbs, wisdom and knowledge surpassing that of mere mankind, infinite good or infinite evil, I know not which. I shrank in mortal terror at their merciless scrutiny, but I could neither close my eyes nor tear them away until a hand was passed across my brow and the spell was broken. Now a knife caught my bonds, and I was raised by a strong arm to a sitting posture. How is it possible to describe the horror of the appalling scene that met my shrinking eyes, as for the first time since I had been a prisoner, I was able to look upon my surroundings? The blood-red sun was setting in a stormy sky from which in the distance the lightning still flickered. Close beside me stood the tall form of the priestess, and below, on the lower tiers of the pyramid, were grouped about 20 men priests. I judged them to be all robed in white garments, all white men of fierce and sinister aspect. But it was not upon these that my eyes rested, but upon the grim and awful holocaust that stretched in all directions below and beyond. For the pyramid stood as an island in a sea of dead men. From its base to the mighty walls that encircled the vast floor of the crater, it stretched in an unbroken sheet, unbroken, that is, except for the myriad drowned bodies from which the rapidly receding flood was fast draining away. The glare from the crimson sunset turned into a sea of blood, and each moment the forms of the drowned multitude showed more and more distinctly, clasping and clinging to each other in the awful contortions of death as they had struggled with each other in their frantic fight against that awful cataclysm. Heap upon heap, line after line, thousands upon thousands of them, a multitude, a whole nation overwhelmed and destroyed. Not white men such as the priests, who alone had been saved upon the pyramid, but brown men of Inyati's type, their bodies nude except for a loincloth. Stunned and dismayed at the fearful sight, I sat inert upon the altar and gazed upon the mighty hecatomb in utter forgetfulness of my own awful position, till the priestess who had awakened me and who also had stood in silent contemplation turned and once more fixed her glowing eyes upon me. "Look well, O stranger, look well upon these thy dead," she said in a clear, ringing voice, "upon these who would have sacrificed thee, yet who, dying, called upon thee, their bound sacrifice, to save them. Save us, mighty one," they supplicated. "Thou who art mightier than the snake, save us." Poor fools, they are dead all are dead. "And thou helpless, mighty one," she mocked, "art thou content with this thy vengeance, or must we poor servants of the snake also die to appease thy wrath?" The look and tone of fierce mockery brought back to me all the fear of hideous torture I had felt before, and I begged that they should mercifully kill me and have done. "Nay," she replied, fear not, that shall not be. I have told thee thy life is safe. Well do I know that thou art but a man and no God, such as these poor fools thought thee at the last, but the snake hath spared thee, and thy life is sacred. Free shalt thou go, free and with an abundance of the bright stones these dead people deemed sacred, and the lust of which brought thee, O stranger, unasked and unwelcome, to this our land. Life shall be thine, and thou shalt be guided back to the land from whence thou earnest. But thou shalt eat first of the fruit of forgetfulness, and never shalt thou find again the path by which thou earnest hither, or that other by which thou shalt return. The solemn tone and promise allayed my fears somewhat. At least my life was to be spared. But this talk of not finding the path again, did it mean that they would blind me? Even as the thought entered my mind, the mysterious being who held me in her power answered it as though I had spoken it aloud. "Fear not, I say again," said she. "Neither thine eyes nor a hair of thy head shall be injured. Rather do I grant thee a precious boon, such as many crave for in vain, the boon of forgetfulness, yet not of all. Stand upon thy feet, O stranger, and look well upon this lake of the dead. Then turn and look upon me. These things thou shalt not forget." Weak and shaken by my awful experience, I tottered as I tried to stand upright, and but for her supporting hand I should have fallen. "Aye, thou art weak," said she again, "but that which I will give will bring back the strength to thy palsied limbs. Look well, I say, and forget not this." Forget? How could I ever forget that awful scene, the blood-red water, the countless heaps of drowned men, the upturned faces of the pale priests below me, their dark eyes fixed upon me with looks of hatred and malevolence? "Aye, they would torture and sacrifice thee," said the strange being who dominated them, and who held my life in her hands, and who again answered my unspoken thought. "But that may not be. And now look thou on me and forget not." She stood proudly erect, her brow bound by a bronze snake, the miniature of the idol above. The diamond set in this strange coronet, outdone in splendor by the fires of her wondrous eyes. And now I saw her, not as a sphinx-like being of terror, but as a glorious woman, a creature to be adored for her beauty alone, and the long stagnant blood coursed through my veins as I gazed entranced and forever enthralled. No thought of that woman who waited crossed my mind. Nothing but mad desire and adoration filled me for this creature of unearthly beauty, and spirit, woman, devil, be she what she might, my one mad longing was to gaze upon her, to worship her, to possess her forever. And as I gazed spellbound, she spoke again. "Nay, I see thou wilt never forget." She smiled gravely. "Yet must thou eat of the fruit that will bring forgetfulness of all other things." She called to the priest in another tongue, and one came scowlingly, bringing with him a small box of ebony. The priestess took something from it and again turned her piercing eyes upon my own, compelling, commanding, dominating me as she had done when I first opened my eyes. I tried to speak, to beg, to implore that I might remain her slave, if need be, but near her. But she had put a spell upon my tongue, and I could not. Slowly she held forth her hand, and in the palm I now saw a small withered berry, black and shriveled, but in shape like the scarlet berries I had eaten so often in the crater. "Eat and forget. Eat and forget," the voice commanded, and now the eyes sought mine again and fascinated and mastered me. No, I would not eat. I would not go, and with all my strength I opposed her will. This was poison, surely. I would not eat. "I seek not thy life, rather would I save it," came the warning as I struggled against the domination. "I have but to hold forth my hand to these my servants, and they would tear thee limb from limb. See then." A gesture, and the crowd of frowning priests sprang up the steps and swarmed round me, their fierce vulpine faces aglow with terrible joy, their long talon-like nails outstretched to rend me fearful, horrifying. At a word, and just as they had almost reached me, the priestess stayed them. But now their hot breath beat close upon me, and in deadly fear I stretched out my hand and took the berry. "Eat, Eat and be safe. No harm shall come thee. Eat and forget. Eat and forget. And with the clarion accents ringing in my ears, and with those unfathomable eyes gazing steadily into my own, I crushed the berry between my teeth and swallowed it. A strange, acrid taste, similar but vastly stronger than the berries I had eaten before, a rush of blood to my head, a tingling through all my veins, and then a blackness surging up and hiding all, even blotting out the star-like eyes before me, till all was black. An endless dream of wanderings in thick pathless forests, an endless search for something lost, an eternity of vague formless dreams, searching, and finding nothing, an infinite sorrow for something I could never again find. Eyes gleaming at me from the dark forest, a myriad eyes coming and going in the vague shadows, and a voice calling, something I could not understand, and through all, the sorrow for something precious, lost beyond recall. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Unwind With Me podcast. I hope this has been a relaxing experience for you. Join me next time when I will read the concluding chapter of A Rip Van Winkle of the Kalahari. For more information, please visit unwindwithme.com.